Now it's the time to introduce our second and last keynote for today, Evangelia Adamou. Dr. Adamou is a senior researcher in linguistics at the National Center for Scientific Research in France. She studied French language and linguistics at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in Greece, and she holds a PhD degree in general linguistics from the University Paris Sorbonne, France. Dr. Adamou specializes in the analysis of underdescribed languages with a focus on language contact and bilingualism, combining corpus and experimental methods. She has conducted extensive linguistic fieldwork in the Balkans on Romani and Balkan Slavic, and in Mexico on Ixtepec and indigenous language with less than 10 speakers left, and Romani. Her publications include papers in international journals such as Language in Society, and the International Journal of Bilingualism. Her most recent book is The Adaptive Bilingual Mind, Insights from Endangered Languages, and the edited Routledge Handbook of Language Contact with Yaron Matras, also from Routledge. She's currently a co-PI, principal investigator for the French-Russian program, Atlas of the Balkan Linguistic Area, together with Andrei Sobolev, with funding from the French National Research Agency and the Russian Science Foundation. Let us welcome with an applause Dr. Evangelia Adamou.
Thank you, Eda, for the very kind introduction, and hello everyone, and thank you for attending this talk after a very interesting and long day at in Tirana. Today I would like to contribute to the conference's theme on diaspora languages by discussing Romani, which is a diaspora Indic language spoken exclusively outside the Indian subcontinent for several centuries. So what does this mean? In practice, it means that Romani shares some similarities with languages like Hindi, Urdu, and Punjabi, among others. So speakers of Romani who listen to speakers of other Indic languages often realize this proximity based on the lexicon, as for example, the word hair in Romani is pronounced bal, and it is pronounced in similar ways in other Indic languages. Now, this similarity is not random, and scholars compared the systematic changes in the sounds of words in Romani and other Indic languages and in written texts. And this allowed, for example, Turner already in the early 20th century to estimate that Romani emerged in central India, a view that is currently accepted in Romani linguistics. You can see here that the Romani verb to hear is ashun, from Old Indic Sanskrit shrun, if I pronounce correctly, and that the Romani form actually resembles mostly the form that is found in the ancestral forms, let's say, of the Central Indic languages. Historical phonology allows for even more fine-grained observations, indicating, for example, that the ancestors of today's Romani speakers most likely moves from central to northwest India before the 4th century. So how do we know? Well, Romani speakers often use the word patrin for leaf, to say leaf, which is close to the Sanskrit pronunciation of the same word. But when we compare old texts from different periods and different languages, we realize that there was an innovation in the pronunciation of this word in central India, and that Romani doesn't share this innovation. So probably the ancestors of today's Romani speakers had left central India before the innovation took place. So this is the kind of comparisons that linguists are doing to be able to draw such conclusions about the movements of, you know, in such old times. Now, given that Romani shares various innovations that took place among Indic languages before the 9th century, scholars also believe that the ancestors of Roma probably were still in Northwest India until the 8th or 9th centuries. And after leaving India, they arrived at the Byzantine Empire around the 10th century. Linguists can retrace Roma's possible itinerary from India thanks to the study of lexical borrowings. And we still find in many contemporary Romani varieties borrowings from Persian or Kurdish and Kurdish. For example, for the word strength, they say zor, luck is baht, and also words from Armenian. For horse, it's grass, honor, it's pativ, and of course, Greek. Now, Byzantine Greek, okay? It's not recent borrowings because they're shared among all the Romani varieties. For example, numerals like efta, ochto, enya, and even kinship terms like papo or papus, depending on the varieties, which means grandfather. But beyond lexical borrowings, Romani changed considerably and became a European type of language. A good example to make this point is the order of objects and verbs. Like when we say, for example, Ionella eats an apple. Apple is the object and it follows the verb. At present, most Romani varieties have a dominant verb-object order. In this map from Walls, this is represented in the languages of the world in green. Whereas an object-verb order is found in most Indic languages, here in blue. Now, as verb-object is also the most frequent order in European languages, the hypothesis is that this change in Romani from an object-verb, like the blue type, to a verb-object, the green type, was due mainly to contact with European languages. Let's see another good example to illustrate how Romani grammar changed. For example, Romani developed a definite article quite early, and probably through contact with Byzantine Greek. And you can see in this map that most languages in Western Europe have definite articles. These are the dots in blue, but that definite articles are absent in most languages spoken in India. And these are the yellow and red dots. So Romani, once again, looks more like a Western European language than an Indic language. Another feature is that Romani exhibits nominative-accusative alignment for full noun phrases. So this means that the single argument of an intransitive clause and the agent-like argument of a monotransitive clause are marked with the same case, while the patient-like argument, let's say the object, okay, of a monotransitive clause takes a different case, which is more marked than the nominative case, nominative-accusative. In comparison, morphological ergative alignment is found in many Indic languages, or we find a tripartite alignment system where single agent and patient-like arguments are marked differently depending on tense mood aspect specifications. Now, ergative alignment can also be reconstructed for Proto-Romani, which means Romani as spoken before contact with the European languages. And so once again, this change from ergative alignment to nominative accusative alignment is another very important contact-induced change. Okay, now we said that Roma arrived in the Byzantine Empire in the 10th century. But then what happened is that the Ottoman expansion in the Balkans, which started in the 14th century, created instability. And so some Romani people decided to flee the wars, like people nowadays flee wars in Syria or Afghanistan, right? And so they settled in Western and Northern Europe. Nowadays, Roma are therefore the largest ethnic minority in Europe. The European Commission estimates that 6 million Roma reside in the European Union, but this number doubles when considering Europe as a whole. Over the centuries, some Romani varieties ceased to be transmitted to younger generations, even when a part of the Romani lexicon is still in use. And this is the case in the Scandinavian countries, the United Kingdom, Spain, Portugal, where revitalization efforts are ongoing, while other Romani varieties were maintained. So these are the pink dots where we have speakers from Romani inflected varieties. So you can see that there are a lot in the Balkans and Central and Eastern Europe. This is a map from the Romani Morphosyntax database. Some 20 years ago, Bakker estimated that approximately 4.6 million Roma speak Romani in Europe, with countries like Albania exhibiting the highest rates of Romani speakers among the local Romani population, going up to 95% of the Romani community who also speak Romani inflected. And then we have countries like the United Kingdom and Spain, which exhibit the lowest rates of Romani speakers. Again, Romani inflected, okay? So this represents less than 1% of the Romani population when we exclude for recent migrants who may have come from the Balkans, for example. Now, in these new settings throughout Europe, intensive multilingualism impacted Romani grammar once again, with different outcomes for the various Romani varieties, since we had, different contact settings now. For example, the definite article, you remember, it was developed under the influence of Byzantine Greek. So in these varieties, it was reduced and lost only in the varieties whose speakers were in long-term contact with languages that lack definite articles. And this is the case in the Lovari Romani variety, which is spoken in Russia, as this variety is in contact with Russian, a language without a definite article. And you can see on the left that the definite article O is used in Caldaraș Romani from Romania, but that it is absent in the exact same sentences in Lovari from Russia on the right. Another example comes from the order of the adjective and the noun. So in Romani, the adjective typically precedes the noun. Such languages are represented on the map in blue. And this adjective noun order is widespread among the languages of India and more generally of Eurasia, apart from Western Europe, where the order noun adjective is dominant. And here it's represented in green. Interestingly, when we compared several Romani varieties using the Romani Morphosyntax database, we found that Romani speakers who also speak a language with a dominant noun adjective order, like Romance languages, for example, like Romanian, Italian, and Spanish, these speakers are increasingly adopting a noun-adjective order in Romani. So in this figure, you can see that noun-adjective responses by these speakers represent up to 70% of their uses. In contrast, Romani speakers who also speak a language with a dominant adjective noun order, like, for example, Slavic languages, well, they maintain this order in Romani as well. Okay, obviously, in addition to these contact-induced changes in grammar, code switching and lexical borrowing are very frequent in all Romani varieties. And for example, in a sample of 41 languages from across the world, the Selice Romani variety, which represents Romani in this database, appears to be the highest borrower. Moreover, some Romani varieties are well known for exhibiting rare adaptation strategies for borrowings. This is the case of Romani spoken in Greek Thrace. Here you can see an example where verbs from Turkish with Turkish verb morphology, like to be tired and to rest here in red, are used together with Romani inflected pronouns and with case, okay, and other Romani verbs like to look and to want here. And this kind of mixing is also used in some Romani varieties from Finland and Russia in contact with Finnish and Russian respectively. And this is quite rare across the world. If you want to listen to Romani Turkish, you can visit the Pankilos collection. We talked about it earlier today. And you will find some stories that I have transcribed and annotated together with the sound, and you see how fluid these switches are. Okay, now, in addition to Europe, the presence of Roma in the Americas is documented as early as the colonial period, and arrivals of newcomers resumed during the 19th century and have been continuous ever since. At present, Romani families live in practically every country of the American continent. The figures are not exact. There are very few studies on Romani presence in the Americas. Again, this new contact setting led to new changes in Romani grammar. For example, Romani Spanish bilinguals who live in Mexico for generations, right? They have introduced a copula distinction that is present in Spanish between ser and estar. Both verbs mean to be. As you can see in the sentence on the left, like us, she is young, Mexican Romani speakers will say Saramende, hui voi siterni. This is how Roma from Europe would also say this by using the same verb in Romani, to be. But Mexican Roma differ from European Roma in that they have another way of saying to be. And you can see this on the right for the sentence, because I didn't call him and now he's mad. So this is said in Mexican Romani by using the person pronouns in el. For example, Mexican Roma say vo juliaricolo. This is translated in Spanish by using estar, as in está enojado. So to summarize, we have seen how in the absence of normative linguistic institutions, complex multilingual practices rapidly modify the grammar of a diaspora language, such as Romani. And in addition to lexical borrowings, significant changes in the grammar are noted for Romani during Byzantine times, then in successive diaspora settings in Europe and in the Americas, depending on the new contact languages. Right, so that was the linguistic part. And in the second part of my talk, I would like to briefly talk about what Roma say about, well, language revitalization. We didn't use this term when we worked with them, but you know, this is a term that has been discussed in the conference and is the technical term, let's say. Well, first of all, let's say that over the last 40 years, European states, transnational institutions like the Council of Europe, foundations, associations became engaged into official language policy and planning of Romani. And in the Americas, this is just the case in Colombia. However, we also know that the contemporary understanding of language policy is a combination of individual and group language practices, individual and group beliefs about language, and management decisions by an authorized body. Critical scientists also call for language policy to be understood as a practice that aims to help speakers achieve specific cultural, educational, and economic goals. And similarly, in a folk linguistics perspective, Albëresh proposes to take into consideration the knowledge and dispositions that individual speakers may have towards language policy. So this is in this spirit that we conducted 2 online surveys during the pandemic to explore dispositions towards Romani language policy in 2 geographically distant settings, Romania and Colombia. These two settings share some similarities regarding institutional language policy, but also exhibit notable differences. Indeed, both countries officially recognize Romani as a minority language, but Romania incorporated the Romani language in the education system in the 1990s, whereas in Colombia, such measures are very recent and considerably less developed. Also, population numbers differ, with estimates of Roma in Romania varying between 1.2 and 2.5 million people, and in Colombia between 2,500 and 5,000 people. So the 2 settings are quite different in that sense. So following Albëresh 2014, we used 2 surveys that we adapted for the 2 settings. And respondents were asked to indicate on a 5-point scale their agreement with various statements or to choose among several responses. 180 respondents from Romania and 28 from Colombia completed the survey. In the Romanian survey, 80% of respondents declared being Roma, but only 65% declared speaking Romani. And in the Colombian survey, 96% self-identified as Roma and 86% declared speaking Romani. Okay, let's look briefly at the results. We find some similarities in the responses of the 2 groups. For instance, general multilingualism is the preferred language model as opposed to monolingualism. So, for example, 66% of Romanian and 85% of Colombian respondents strongly disagree with the statement, "It would be better if everyone in the country spoke one language in all situations." Now, more specifically, when asked whether Roma children should grow up bilingual, the great majority of Romanians and Colombians agree that children should grow up speaking Romani and Romanian or Spanish accordingly. And the great majority of both groups agree with the idea that Romani will die if parents don't speak it to their children. To the statement, in revitalizing the language, people who can speak Romani should do so, most agree that they should do so when talking with family and friends. But few said that they should use Romani at work or in official situations, such as in parliament or in dealings with government officials. And there is a small difference there with the respondents from Romania and Colombia. Also, Romani language is viewed as an intrinsic part of Romani culture by both groups, even though only a small part of all respondents considered that one has to speak Romani to be a real Rom. There are, however, some differences between the two groups. To the statement, revitalizing Romani should be a job for, most respondents agree that it should be a job for families and communities, but respondents from Romania agreed that this is also a job for the education system, the government, and even linguists. And in comparison, these actors are not so important for the Colombian respondents. In response to the statement, in revitalizing Romani, it is important to learn how to. Both groups agree that it is important to learn how to speak Romani and understand it when it is spoken, but only Roma from Romania consider that one also has to read and write in it. Finally, to the statement, if a word doesn't exist in Romani, it would be better to. Respondents from Colombia said it would be better to use the Spanish word or a new word that sounds a bit like Spanish, so this means a borrowing, whereas respondents from Romania prefer to create a new word based on Indic languages. So to summarize, in the second part of this talk, we have seen how Roma from Colombia and Romania overall value multilingualism and the transmission of Romani from one generation to the other. The comparison of responses shows that once institutional language policies are established, for example, by including Romani in the formal education system, as is the case in Romania, they promote a language ideology whereby language maintenance is ensured through schools in addition to families. Similarly, institutional language policy based on education endorses the significance of Romani in reading and writing in addition to oral interactions, and also promotes these top-down lexical creation processes rather than the everyday processes of lexical borrowing available to speakers and in any case observed in most Romani varieties across Europe and the Americas up until today. So to conclude, I hope that I have successfully showed how Romani as a diaspora language par excellence offers a unique opportunity to observe how a language is maintained, lost, and more importantly, changes throughout the centuries in successive diaspora settings. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to the organizers and to Eda the Hemi for the invitation. Huge thanks to all the Roma who have collaborated in these studies. And of course, thanks to my co-authors, Esteban Acuña, Anton Felgen, Kimo Grankvist, Jaron Matras, and Christian Padure. Thank you.
Thank you.